So, hey everyone, unofficially, happy Friday. We're just putting the finishing touches on everything, and then we'll roll the intro. But in the meantime, just hi. This is one that came out of, you know, he was I don't know. I'm gonna make a joke about unplanned, but it was unplanned, right? This
It's
is
a little
a gift,
unplanned,
a
yeah.
gift from the Lord, from the stork,
Yeah.
whatever you want to say. But yeah, how's the sound? Make sure you chime in, see if the sound's good. A lot of times on Odyssey, it just doesn't work, and then I have to hit reset the stream, and then it does work.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So yeah, there we go. But yeah, it's been a wild few weeks. I mean, obviously, we're going to touch more on the culture and all that kind of stuff later. But what have you thought of just the astronomical price rise of well, not I mean astronomical in some cases and just very good in other cases. What have you thought about the mooning, the privacy moon? Has it been? Do you think it's privacy season, or do you think it's kind of too early to say that?
Yeah, I mean, I really don't know with when it comes to crypto, it seems like it's just a roulette wheel and some coins just happen to be chosen at different periods, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was just it was Zcash's time evidently. I mean, it was pumping like crazy, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of died down at this point. So yeah, I don't know what else is pumping really. I don't really look at charts too often, to be honest. But yeah, who knows? You might wake up tomorrow and it'll be Ethereum or something.
Yeah, it does tend to be. I mean, just all over the place. I don't really pay attention until it goes all over X.
Yeah,
It just as a quick, casual scroll down things, it does look like the gold ones are doing well today because of gold. I'm sure.
I do. Yeah, I do like precious metals. I like gold a lot and
Hmm.
silver as well. So that's been pretty cool to see. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of like precious metal love in Bitcoin and stuff. Just because it's that hard money, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Got
there's
respect. You got to put respect on the name.
the funny thing about all that is, like the sort of like animosity between like the high priests, whether it's like Peter Schiff, and then you know,
I forget. I like Peter Schiff just because he like reminds me of my grandfather. you
yeah.
I just love that vibe of him where he doesn't care.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I kind of like the fact gold is mooning just to see Peter Schiff dab on the Bitcoin moon boys. I think that's pretty funny.
Yeah, the funny thing is, like I I did some work for Peter Schiff a long time ago. I did some like basic copywriting for his like silver newsletter at one
Oh,
point.
sweet.
I know some people who work with him, and he was had a booth at the Bitcoin conference this year. I didn't manage to
Yeah.
see him, but I did go by there. The funny thing about him is when you go to like this cypherpunk hardcore stuff, he comes from really hardcore roots. Not many know his dad, Erwin Schiff, died in prison for writing a book on tax evasion. And so,
Whoa.
literally, his dad wrote something called The Federal Mafia, which, as far as I'm aware, was the only one of like two books that was ever banned for sale in the US. And one of them was some weird Victorian era like romance novel that had some lewdness that they didn't like that was like banned for some reason. And the Federal Mafia, of course, it's always been you can find it. It's just that it was banned for sale because the government's point of view was it was like a scam. Therefore, you can't scam people. It's fraudulent. But it literally told people you don't have to constitutionally pay income taxes. And he ended up
Gotcha.
going to prison for that, and he died in prison. He was there for like 20 years or something. And so it's kind of like he was like the proto Ross Ulbricht without the happy ending.
Wow.
So yeah, Peter Schiff has some like gangster roots. He's kind of more, he's kind of more in the financial circus kind of area right now. But I think he knows all too well, and I do think he is like a crypto fan at heart. It's just that first of all, he has to promote gold because that's his business, and
Hmm.
second, come on, how could he not? He gets so much attention. He's probably monetized to hell and back on X from like all this. Like how does he not
Yeah.
lean into
Oh, he
the
gets
villain role?
the engagement bait is like he's got to be the goat of crypto engagement bait. Like he's just crushing it.
Yes, he's just like wrong enough that everyone's there for it, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
But then he's also right enough and antagonistic about it that you can't just like completely write him off.
yeah,
So
exactly.
it's just pretty funny. All right, let me do the intro real quick, and then we'll officially get everything started, I guess. All right,
All
ready?
right, sounds good.
3, 2, 1, go. All right, so hey everyone, officially now, welcome to the Digital Cash Rundown, episode 207. That means for over 207 weeks, I've been doing this every Friday with a few left out for travel and stuff. It's like mid 2020, I guess. I'm joined by the one and only, as far as I know, Xenu. How's it going?
Hey, thanks for having me, Joel.
Yeah, no problem. I'm always, open to have as many interesting conversations as possible, and you kind of came out to, bring up some interesting points on what I consider to be sort of a red hot topic right now, which is like the privacy is front and center, and then conflict between different tribes of that seems to also be front and center. And this space that I run every Thursday, next week's one, this one was yesterday, was on privacy by default, like is it necessary kind of thing, and this next one is going to be on does culture matter in crypto. So
Nice.
all very topical, but
Perfect.
but yeah, would you mind just giving yourself this rather than like a news? Typically, I throw up some news stories and talk about that, but just this general subject is sort of the news story. Do you have any kind of intro for yourself you want to give, other than some guy whose opinions will be cool?
Yeah, I'm a content creator myself, antimoonboy.com, if you'd like to check that out. I have a YouTube, Odyssey, and Rumble, and I have a podcast I drop every Monday, which you can find on all those platforms and Spotify as well. Yeah, basically, my whole shtick, I guess, is that I'm very much about the usage of cryptocurrency. And I call it anti-Moonboy because, in my opinion, Moonboyism is a real detriment to cryptocurrency, and I think it's actually a real problem with the culture of cryptocurrency. In fact, so I'm sure we're going to touch on that as well, and that's something that affects, I think, every cryptocurrency. Now, most of my work involves Monero because I'm just very involved with that project. On my channel, I also have a series called Attack of the Poison Outputs, which is a series actually about how to attack Monero. It's over 30 parts long on YouTube, totally free. And if you really want to understand how Monero works, I highly recommend checking it out because I walk through examples, real world examples as well, when Monero was used in illicit transactions, and later on the feds were attacking it. Lastly, I also have a manifesto called Darknet Market Maximalism, and really what this is, it's not an endorsement of the darknet. I don't want people to think that that's why I'm here or anything. But what it is it's an acknowledgement that the oldest and largest peer-to-peer economy that depends on cryptocurrency is really important to observe. And Monero just happens to be the cryptocurrency that is there. And I think that has a lot to do with the culture that it has, which is this bleeding edge crypto anarchism that is uncompromising. I think it's really important for digital cash to have that as part of its culture because, when push comes to shove, people who are on the outside, they want to trust something that is fighting back. And I think that concept of not being completely open to everything is actually kind of important. There is, I think, a balancing act, absolutely. But I think Monero, as if you take a look at the whole spectrum of issues, I think it aligns best of all with crypto anarchism. So yeah, check out my content. It's pretty great, I think.
Yeah, for sure. We're definitely going to get into a lot of that stuff because there's a lot of, tool versus culture type things going on. And I think it'll be kind of interesting to highlight. Let me hit up the weekly show, though, for Coin ATM Radar because they're cool people. This podcast is very proudly, I'm really struggling over my words today. Maybe I got a brain tumor. Who knows? This podcast is very proudly sponsored by Coin ATM Radar. When buying crypto with cash, an ATM is much more reliable and safer than meeting some rando in a random place and getting shanked. And unlike an exchange which could freeze your account, you do truly own all the crypto you buy. With Coin ATM Radar, you can find crypto ATMs and other services where you can buy or sell cryptocurrencies for cash. On their website, you can search by coin, address, if the ATM supports selling as well as buying, and you can also search by geographical areas such as country, state, and city. And of course, you can compare and check actual current fees across different ATMs. So if you want to use them, go to coinatmradar.com, which is coinatmradar.com. And hopefully you heard all that. The funny thing about them is our mutual buddy, Vlad, I only ever saw his posts when he posted about like Wasabi wallet stuff, like Wasabi CoinJoin. And so I kind of didn't really know who he was. And Coin ATM Radar reached out to me at one point saying, hey, we wanted to sponsor Vlad, but he didn't answer. So what about you instead? I'm like, okay, I'll take sloppy seconds. So that's how they came on. And of course they pay me in crypto. Bitcoin Cash in this case is what they wanted to do. And so I'm happy to talk to them. So I wonder if I can get them to sponsor Vlad's podcast too, or if they're all out of sponsorship money with me. So this whole subject we were in on, I didn't really have too many things to put up on the screen about this. I had a post, I think it was today, yeah, where I talked about, I'm just going to use that as a good jumping off point on this because there's a lot of yes and no about this, where I said basically the cypherpunk hardcore libertarian crypto people are definitely my people, but sometimes they have a really simplistic view of government and business. Government equals bad and businesses should add privacy coins or they're cowards are fine sentiments, but they do nothing in reality. True cypherpunks owe it to their philosophy to study how to win, so they study and win. Would you rather suck up to regulators, quote, or keep living on fiat forever, anon? Don't take the blue pill and keep living blissfully LARPing forever. Take the red pill and wake up to the cold, hard reality, but a reality you can take that can take you to freedom. So obviously some little hyperbolic tinges to that for X spiciness, but otherwise that's just like a jumping off point. So yeah, where do we go from here?
Yeah, I guess I can start. Yeah, when it comes to culture in digital cash, I think there's really two extremes that kind of balance each other out. And on one hand, you have the hardcore crypto anarchism. And on the other hand, you have the cryptographic researchers and technological experts, the PhDs who are experts in their field. And together they create digital cash. So every cryptocurrency is essentially a whole slew of trade-offs that are decided by these two different extremes. And no project is perfect. It's a balancing act. But generally speaking, in my opinion, the tech side is overrepresented by most projects. And this is pretty logical if you think about it, because crypto anarchism is pretty extreme, and it's pretty vocal too. I'm sure people have noticed. Vocally is very shocking. It ruffled a lot of feathers, but it was a movement with an idealized purpose. And this to me has arguably just as much more technical or more importance as the technical side of Bitcoin, that ideology, because it's something that people can rally behind.
Yeah. So I get to, there's so much nuance to that, so I can't really say agree or disagree. I definitely agree to a significant extent. So here's the thing. I think that the usage of the tool matters as much or more than what the tool does itself, as in if it could do cool things, but it's only used for one thing. The network effects for a tool like this are so massive and necessary that if it does need its own culture and economy and things like that. It also, where I will also kind of agree on that, is I do think that full-on crypto anarchism in some way, shape, or form should be the heart and soul of crypto. It should be where everything comes from. So, for example, if people Like it's more any thought leader, any, you know, project lead developer, whatever, should probably come from that standpoint or something very close to it. So even when things that emanate out from there aren't necessarily fully crypto anarchic, it still is the main driving force of the space.
Yeah, especially it's the driving force when times are like bad, right? When you're in a bear market, what's going to keep propelling a project forward? And the other thing to mention here is Moon Boys. I think this is culturally a very important topic because Moonboyism, for what it's worth, I'm not saying that investing in a cryptocurrency is bad. That's a use case. You know, there's scarcity. Obviously, you can invest in a cryptocurrency. What Moon Boys are, though, is they are people who don't care at all about any of the things we're talking about. Okay, they don't care about the ideology. They don't care about the tech. They're just here to get rich, and this is a problem culturally because they're kind of useless other than just buying and holding, and kind of yelling really loudly, and they can be compromised. So I think that it's actually an attack, and we've seen this happen with Bitcoin. So I would like to point that out at least because, without the number go up happening, it's hard for a cryptocurrency to progress. What are people going to be there for, right? And what I think what really drives that is with a lot of different projects where you have that kind of libertarian leaning, open source, FOSS kind of vibe, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's so the thing where this gets a little bit interesting is the people that care about freedom in some way, shape, or form, that care about freedom tech, that want it to work maximally, come from all kinds of different backgrounds, and it is very amusing to me if I step back for a second and see like the oil and water of Zcash and Monero that is literally, of all the people who are interested in this general subject matter, there's the grouping that went here and the grouping that went there, and they're vastly different value systems, I would say. It doesn't mean, I think that at the root, you have a lot of the same, like, liberty maximalist, freedom maximalist, like all that kind of same thing. But when you get to the culture of how that represents, it ends up being like very opposite. And I've sort of noticed, because I'm sort of in a peripheral of the Zcash community, right? I did some work with Zcash a couple of years ago. I have a lot of friends there, but I'm not, super involved at all. But I kind of have noticed things are getting better now, I think, but in the early days, they were very trying to be like way too sanitary for kind of a lack of a better term.
It's very sterile is the issue. It's very corporate. It feels like you are in a CEO boardroom, It just has this very artificial tone to it. And this is a problem, I think, because you feel like you are being judged, essentially, because they have certain opinions that they think are correct. And if you don't have those opinions, you're going to get blocked by Zuko. I mean, I'm blocked. I have no idea why I'm even blocked by him. I mean, maybe I was being a troll. I don't know. But he blocks everybody, right? That's kind of the vibe that you get from a lot of the Zcash people, where there's this kind of snootiness. And I think this is really where there's this animosity, where it's like a holier than thou thing, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that it does. So, like, I also am a personal friend of Zuko. I think he's a wonderful dude. He's just not he's not into the public kind of Thunderdome, as it were, right?
That's fair.
The disagreement side of things.
Yeah.
And, I think that it's also that like Zcash has done significantly better since Zuko moved to kind of the research role of like Shielded Labs, and we have Josh sort of heading things up. I do complain about that stuff all the time on the Zcash side, as far as like it's hard to get sort of like the top type people onto shows and podcasts and things, it's hard to kind of, get down and dirty in a lot of ways. There is a sort of like, I don't know if aloofness is the right word for it, but there is this like, okay, we're focused on like the higher institutions. We're focused on academia and science and in government level policy, trying to mold that in a more permissive freedom direction, and just like all of that stuff, and just not the get down and dirty side of things. I think that's getting better. It is still, I don't know if anyone reasonable in Zcash would completely disagree with that, though. I think that you'd have to sort of admit that there is a little bit more of a upper middle class kind of vibe to it, a little bit more of a kind of like much more of like an Edward Snowden vibe than maybe the I'm trying to think of another than a John McAfee, right? It's more of a Edward Snowden versus John McAfee cultural kind of thing.
That's a good way to describe it. Yeah, that's funny. It's elitist is really what it is. And it feels like kind of this exclusive club, I guess I would say. Whereas with the Monero developers, it's kind of the meme where the developer who shows up once a year is wearing like a sweatshirt and like baggy shorts. Like that's kind of the Monero developer that you have. Whereas with Zcash, it just feels different. They feel very polished, I guess. And so when it comes to crypto anarchism, where it's very obviously, against that kind of sterile kind of nature. It's very pro free market. This is a red flag, right?
Yeah, to a certain extent. I think that there's definitely like a limit, a limit to it, right? As far as if you were exclusive in any way, shape, or form, you exclude some people, right? And so what I would, I guess, say is that there's some sort of an exclusive thing that goes both ways, sort of. Whereas with like the Zcash world, you get sort of like the highest type things, as far as like highest in an academic institution, highest in a government institution, highest in a business world, like focused on that sometimes excludes people in the middle and definitely in the below. And then maybe on the Monero side of things, you kind of have a situation of, it's sort of like the opposite, where you have, the fringe is very well represented. You have darknet market adoption, for example, and then you have more of the hardcore libertarian people, and you have, sometimes like people who are just not afraid of toxicity. That doesn't mean people who are toxic, but just people who just don't mind. Like, for example, I would put Rerar or Diego Salazar, I'd put him in that camp of, he's always been lovely. Every interaction I've had with him, he's been great, but he doesn't seem to be bothered by people who are a little bit more, rambunctious around him. And so it's in that kind of situation, people who are in the middle, maybe, or maybe at the top, might get freaked out by some of that culture, and so they're excluded. So it's kind of like when you have like both, the distribution of both, you have at the top and you have at the bottom, and there's a lot, the middle kind of gets selectively included, excluded, but then the opposite ends get completely excluded, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, there probably is developers who have seen Monero and they don't want to get involved, or maybe they're kind of put off by some of that animosity and stuff. But I also think that a main driver of Zcash having these maybe more mathematicians working, like I don't know their whole roster or anything, but they have a dev tax. Is kind of the thing. They're getting paid a lot more. Whereas with Monero, it's much harder, and a lot of it is just grassroots raised, right? And I think this is an argument in favor of the dev tax. I personally disagree with it, but I understand the argument here, where you get more people to want to work for you if you're going to be paying them, if you have a salary essentially. And Monero doesn't have a payroll. So I'm not exactly sold on that idea necessarily. I think a lot of the people I've talked to, at least, are pretty indifferent about like what's going on Twitter. It's kind of, a lot of people just view it as noise. and that goes for people in Monero and in Zcash. But yeah, I would also point out too that Monero also still has a lot of phenomenal researchers working for it, and some of the most brilliant people that I know personally too are working on things right now. Like Rucknium, his research right now with the mining going on is phenomenal, and of course Luke Parker with full chain membership proofs, Arctic Mine with his dynamic fees and stuff. This is cutting edge stuff, and just because. I mean, I would also like to point out too that weighting different privacy tools is very difficult because a lot of people don't use cryptocurrency correctly. Anyways, they just get it directly from a centralized exchange, right? And so it's difficult to even like weight something like that if something is being used properly compared to another cryptocurrency, right?
Yeah, for sure. That is kind of an interesting thing. As far as like the dev tax kind of idea, and this is something it's very interesting how there's so many different models of getting things done in crypto, for example, and people get really worked up about certain things. Like, for example, people get really worked up about a limited versus infinite supply, and we're not talking high inflation infinite supply. Like a lot of Bitcoin maximalists dump on Monero all the time because there is a tail emission. And, from my personal perspective, the fact that it's a very small yearly inflation, that's what really matters to me. I think the ultimate limit sounds kind of cool, but I don't really care, right? But some people get worked up. Same thing with proof of work. People aren't just evaluating what works or what it doesn't, what are the trade-offs of each thing. A lot of people get really like, maxy kind of about proof of work. And the same thing with non-mining block reward allocations, let's just say. And I have been sort of a critic of early Zcash on this, where the initial thing was like the founder's reward, right? Where you had a bunch of people, they raised money, they got a lot of money to start this kind of project. And then for the first few years, 20% of the block reward went to a select group of people. And I mean, for me, when that just kind of like a trusted setup type thing for some people, at that point, that was something that I didn't really like. It then got changed to sort of the dev fund, which went to ECC specifically and the Zcash Foundation. So two different entities ended up going from there. An improvement, but still kind of too fixed, right? And then as far as I'm aware, they're looking into making a much more DAO-like structure after that. So it's progress in the right direction. It's not to the destination of the right direction, but I do like that it's getting more decentralized. Now, as far as having money available to do dev things, I like the idea of that because of what those things are able to fund. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about that? Like, once you get out of assume that it can be allocated in complete fairness, right? In complete decentralization. The idea that part of the block reward can pay for developer salaries instead of just all the miners. What do you think of that? The pros and cons of that?
Yeah, this is one of those things where if this was the only issue I had with Zcash, where it had a dev tax and everything else was like up to the standards that I would like, I would be okay with it, But it's one of those things where this is just part of a list of things that I don't really like. And for me, generally speaking, a dev tax, it's a non-starter. I really dislike it. Dev tax, but especially like the opening, kind of like pre-mine, for example. Those are the by far the worst. I don't know. Did Zcash have a pre-mine? I actually don't. Yeah, I just had a dev tax, right?
As far as I'm aware,
yeah. The reason for this is because when it comes to mining, I view digital cash as a commodity, a digital commodity. And so the way I look at it is that the free market should have the opportunity to participate and to find it themselves with, their hardware. And this is also another reason why I really am passionate about having alternatives to ASIC mining. So you can just run your own computer and mine Monero, for example, or whatever other projects. I think mining is actually very important for the culture as well, because if you have a lot of people who are mining cryptocurrency, that means you probably have a lot of people who are computer literate and who really understand technology, and those people can help build applications and help the UX of a project, as well as recommend the project to other tech literate kind of people. I think this is a very overlooked, positive of something like RandomX, where because it has such a good and vibrant CPU culture, mining culture, it has brought in a lot of people. So, I'm not saying RandomX is perfect. We've seen recently with the whole cubic thing, unfortunate situation. It weathered the storm. We're improving it, right? But again, I don't like ASIC mining as it is. And then on top of that, with the dev fee, these things do kind of hurt Zcash for me. Now, I wouldn't say it's the end of the world if that was like, again, the only thing that Zcash had where, they're paying people with these fees, but it's just kind of a part of a list is really the problem for me.
Yeah, it's so that's the thing that's kind of I personally think a lot of these things, I think a lot of these kinds of disagreements tend to be half and half, where half of it is we will just never see eye to eye on kind of thing, as in half of it is like fundamental differences in like values and belief systems, and the other half is disagreements on effectiveness. And I think that half of it will be solved over time. So for example, like I think that the having protocol level developer funding and ASICs, for example, are two things that I think will be solved where everyone will come to the same page on, because what will work will just work. And so, for example, I think as Diego said, he considered RandomX to be a failure. He says it's pretty obvious that it is, in fact, at this point. And I would, I guess, agree with him. I really like the philosophical no ASIC idea. From a security standpoint, it just does not seem to have borne out super well. And that doesn't mean it won't. Maybe this current implementation doesn't work, but I don't know. As long as you have general purpose hardware, then whoever has the most computing power will basically be able to mine on it or attack it, and they won't necessarily have to have specific investment in the network. Like they could just wreck it all and then take off. Whereas if they're ASICs, you still have the centralization problem. That's still a problem. But at least they have a financial risk if they decide to ruin the network.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with the whole RandomX situation, I wouldn't call it a failure yet. It's definitely the trust in it has definitely been broken. I think that we can all agree on.
Yeah,
and
the current implementation needs some changes.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And for me, what was probably the most surprising was that the game theory did not hold up, because this is what I always believed, and this is not what happened, but I always believed that the miners would support the network at the end of the day. And if there was a malicious miner coming in, they would not mine on them. But what was happening is this malicious miner was paying them more in whatever crap that they were, giving them, right? It was cubic, or I don't know what the name of the cryptocurrency even is.
It's funny. During that time that all that was happening, I went and spoke at Boston Blockchain Week, which was run by a company called Cubic Labs. And so there was me hanging around with Cubic logos in the background all during that time. And I can easily see how someone would have gotten the wrong idea.
Yeah, I mean, it was contentious. It definitely was. And the game theory didn't hold up, though. The miners, they betrayed Monero, I guess. Well, I shouldn't say that, because Monero did survive, right? What ended up happening was you had mercenaries appear. This is the variable that I did not foresee happening, but you had mercenaries who they didn't really have any sort of attachment to Monero, and they wanted to get paid more. And that actually makes pretty logical sense if you think about it. Yeah. So I do think there are things happening right now, a lot of research being done. I do think that RandomX can be salvaged. But I would say, though, that there's research ongoing for sure. And this is definitely not something that's going to just stay the way it is. There's going to be improvements forthcoming.
Yeah, I would say so. I hope so. I wrote some article during all this that I shared all over the place. I don't know if anyone Some people got salty about it. Some people liked it. Whatever. But basically, a lot of talk has been around some sort of a finality layer, and some of it is talked about like a proof of stake hybrid. Some people really don't like that. I basically propose something that would be like a delegated stake finality layer that doesn't actually change the underlying random X and doesn't change the money. Like the money still goes to all miners. It's just that, because I noticed that when things go badly, the community tends to come around and they sort of like use the community to bootstrap things, such as, if there's not like, if you want an integration, it's not like you have a foundation that makes some deal. It's just like you have a bunch of people harassing him on X that then gets the thing done, like the Proton Mail style.
Oh yeah.
And then same thing with like when during the Cubic thing, all the community hash rate that came out to kind of support that. And I kind of thought, well, instead of like, if there was why not just have the community who all hold Monero just be able to point their Monero at, a few nodes that would reject blocks that tried to reorg the chain. And then that's it. You just get the community involved, point their money at stuff, and there you go. It just fixes it. And it's similar to kind of what Firo has, something like that. Firo went ASIC resistant, and Ruben has an interesting some interesting stories about that, where it basically says the ASIC miners were much more likely to hold Firo and hang out in the community and want to do things to improve the project. But when they switched to no ASIC, then the miners just dumped immediately and never came around, didn't care. And they got 51% attacked. And so they added chain locks, which is a dash technology, to kind of mitigate that. And it's been working for them. And so something similar to that, but without having to, like a delegated one, without having master nodes and without having to, send money to staked elements, just keeping the money going right to the miners. I think that could work.
Yeah, I mean, all options are on the table. I will say, though, that a proof of work is definitely being prioritized, specifically just proof of work and mitigations on RandomX as it is. So you have like proof of time being proposed, and proof of Tevador just released something on GitHub, another proposal. And the reason this is being prioritized again is just because we want to continue what we have and what we've built. And what we've built is a really vibrant CPU mining culture. I should point out, too, that the hash rate for Monero has skyrocketed over the past year or two. And the hash rate that Cubic was having was actually greater than the hash rate, the combined hash rate of Monero like a year ago. If you look at the hash rate all-time chart, like the hash rate has really gone up. So it's not like people aren't mining Monero. The problem is just not enough people were. And you do have issues where, well, if someone does have a lot of CPU processing power, they can attack the network, right? So, yeah, your idea is interesting. I don't know if it would be easily attacked by someone who just buys a lot of Monero or holds a lot of Monero at like an exchange, for example. I'm sure there probably would be ways to attack it, and with something like that, I'm not sure about what would be the rewards for something like that? Is it just to maintain the network, like kind of like running a node, for example?
Yeah, pretty much the same as like when people go mine at a loss in the case of a hostile situation where it's just like, oh, we're under attack. Let's everyone pulling our money at this thing, and then we can kind of like make sure. So like in the Cubic situation, you're like, oh, these guys are getting a lot of hash rate. Let's it's kind of like that DNS checkpointing thing that's sort of been talked about recently as a temporary fix. It's sort of like adding it like a decentralized version of that, where you just have you just sort of checkpoint the blocks, and whoever has the most stake pointed towards it, I guess those nodes get to like come to consensus on that current on the longest chain. As far as I'm aware, again, I'm not super deep into the technicals, but these kinds of things tend to be like a binary type thing. It's not like choose the chain you decide to like, but it's like the first seen block would get a lock on it. And if you can't come to consensus on the first seen block, you just don't lock it. It just go back to pure proof of work on that side. So there, I don't know. That could be interesting. There are some other thoughts. Chris Pacia, who was the Open Bazaar lead backend developer back in the day, he came out with some proposal a few years ago talking about, or I should say more of a blog post than a full proposal, but about using Avalanche as a finality layer for an instant finality layer for Bitcoin Cash. And he kind of, so far, like eCash has that right now, but in a staked version, right? And actually AVAX, the Avalanche cryptocurrency, is all proof of stake. His thing was going to be proof of work only, and meaning that maybe the pools with the largest hash rate or whatever would then get to decide the instant finality of the network. So there are some ways of getting it done in a pure proof of work way, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, those are interesting ideas. And I know that there's a lot of work being done right now. But yeah, as I said, it will probably remain a CPU mining operation. I would be pretty surprised if it doesn't. In fact, it would be more likely to see Monero shift to ASIC mining than it would be to shift to something like proof of stake, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Which
Yeah.
I think ASIC mining is unlikely for the record, but I do think it would be slightly more likely just because you do have a crossover between Bitcoin and Monero holders. I like Bitcoin as well. It's just, generally speaking, with the mining, we do take the CPU mining very as a point of pride too, for, just to have the common man being able to, mine a cryptocurrency.
Yeah, for sure. And so on the dev fund kind of side of things, there's a bunch of different ways people do these kinds of things. Of course, there's the pure donation kind of way, which I would say kind of modern Monero and Bitcoin Cash is sort of the people the ones that shine on that. Then of course you have like the VC whatever, like massive pre-funding treasury kind of thing where you raise a ton of money and then you use that. And then there's the continuous DAO method, which is you get continual funding, or in Zcash's case, maybe not yet a DAO, but kind of moving in that direction, but still kind of continuous funding rather than one big pot that if you blow through, it's all gone. And of course, the old school days, you had the make it look nobody look but a pre-mine. Where you say like, hey, everyone, let's just mine the coin from scratch or create it from scratch, but then find ways of just somehow getting a giant pile of coins. Or like, for example, Nano was, as far as I understand, the structure of the DAG they use, it's just impossible to have like coin emissions or mining in some way, or the entire thing was like no fees. So therefore, they literally had to create 100% of the eventual supply on day one. And then they distribute it later through like CAPTCHA faucets and stuff like that, supposedly. Again, it seems I'm not the biggest fan of that distribution method, but like there's a lot of people that have sort of done that. And it's interesting, I guess, to compare these kinds of things, because if you're a big enough project, let's just talk top 20 in crypto, top 10, really. Any model can work. It just seems to be when you start to become one of the poors, right? The brokes, that you start to like struggle to like raise money for some things, right?
Yeah, it's funny with Nano, right? They use CAPTCHAs. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's a lot of ways of doing things in crypto. As it turns out.
I guess so. I don't really know. Like, this happens like pretty frequently actually, where you just have like some blanket pre-mine. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that most people buying cryptocurrency don't really understand how cryptocurrency works. So they're just shilled a project and they'll just throw money at it without realizing they're just kind of, making the founders of it richer, I hope things are getting better. I don't know. Like it seems like whenever I see these projects, they just get weirder and weirder. We just had the whole phase on that Pump website, Pump Fun or whatever.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that was crazy. I know that kind of died down, but like that was, it actually got dumber. Yeah. It's kind of impressive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I did see a lot about. Someone actually took me on a tour of Pump Fun and one time, and it was wild. It was not safe for soul. Let's just say that. But yeah, so it's interesting where I did a little video on Multiverse X, formerly known as Elrond, that the team says they haven't run out of money, but they're doing crazy stuff to get more money, so they must have run out of money. But basically, they fundraised, I think, at the beginning anywhere from 9 to 20 million to like launch the project, and then they're kind of running low enough on that they're putting in proposals to change the coin emission from a fixed amount to like a pretty large tail emission and some other stuff. And it seems like if you're a big project, right, like a Solana, and you raise literally all the money, or like an AVAX, you raise literally all the money, and then it's fine. You have plenty of money forever. But it seems like if you're smaller and you raise a decent amount of money, you start trying to play with big boys, and then you run out eventually. And it kind of seems like this dev fund style thing is one way of, if you're not big enough to get enough donations organically, again, like Bitcoin Cash is like 17th or something, or like talking like top 20 type stuff, and Monero's definitely in the top 30. Like at that point, you can maybe get donations, but if you're smaller, like Zcash was, I don't remember how far down it went in CoinMarketCap, but it's got to have been like 170 or something, or like it got way down there.
Yeah.
And for that a project of that size, that's what you consider size in crypto, unfortunately, to be able to still build really cool stuff, you kind of need something like that, I guess.
Yeah, I remember actually reading that they were having some struggles financially, like their payroll was kind of having some issues because of that. Yeah, because it is run like a business, which is, because it kind of is. I don't know the structure that they have necessarily. Yeah, it definitely, the one impact of that is like, if you are like a brand new project, it's a harder playing field to get on, right? You're competing with 15 years of cryptocurrency development, right? Mm-hmm. So it is more challenging. You're right.
Yeah. That's something that I think we're going to see. Like, we're going to see this thing resolved in the next 5 years, I think. Where, for example, Zcash, I'm pretty sure, is on an upward trajectory. Who knows if it's going to stay where it is, if it's going to go higher, whatever. But there's a lot of building and stuff going on. Transactions are actually up, which is always important to look at. I wonder if, let's just say, it's in the same zip code as Monero in terms of all the metrics that matter to longevity, I guess. I wonder if it becomes harder to sustain development for Monero, because it's like, well, there's this other option right here, whereas before it was like, oh, this is the clearly the one option if you really care about privacy. I wonder if it'll have an effect like that, or I wonder if it won't. I wonder if it'll have the opposite effect, and maybe more people will be like, oh, Zcash is doing great, so now we have more money to donate towards Monero development. So it'll be interesting to see. I think it will resolve itself relatively quickly over the next few years, where we will sort of see which model people are able to make work better, and then the one with the winning model will win, and the one that doesn't have it will not do as well. That's probably what I'll think will happen, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, Zcash, they're going to have access to more lump sums of money available, just because that's just how it is, so it'll probably be easier for them to like just raise money, well, it is easier. So that is one advantage of the dev tax, but I don't think Monero developers will have any issue raising money. Monero has a pretty outstanding track record of raising money for different projects. A lot of the early whales of Monero are quite generous when it comes to funding projects. For example, just the other day we had a atomic swap implementation for Ethereum to Monero, which I think is a pretty big deal. Ethereum is used, and we need more atomic swaps, period. So having something like that, I think, is a big deal, and it was funded very quickly. So
yeah, I mean, that's definitely cool, and I do think that this is another thing which maybe goes into culture a little bit, as far as we have Like Bitcoin has so much money behind it in terms of development. As no, unless you count Satoshi's early mining, there's nothing remotely like around a pre-mine. There's no like early VC money, I should say, that kind of stuff. But it hit at this point where enough people were motivated enough, maybe disrespectful to phrase it like this, but motivated enough back holders that they were willing to get a lot of money into development in the ecosystem and stuff. And then like right now, like sometimes it doesn't even seem fair where like you have some ETF say, oh, I'm going to donate untold millions to development. And then Jack Dorsey just happens to be like a Bitcoin maxi. And then he's like, guess what? Tens of millions of merchants around the world are going to take Lightning payments, even though it's a steaming pile of crap, like
Yeah.
we're just, and it's like, it doesn't seem fair. Not that there is anything similar to fairness in the brutal free market, but it's like Bitcoin just has all this extra money. Some of it is from being big, but also a lot of it is from being, for lack of a better term, like corporate friendly. And I don't necessarily mean institutional friendly, although that is a thing, but it's the fact that like Bitcoin got itself into the regulatory clear, I should say, before anything else. Seems that there's a lot more people who are making money off of servicing Bitcoin, and therefore there's money available for that. And then there's the Human Rights Foundation has a big pile of money dedicated to purely Bitcoin open source development. And there's just all this stuff where maybe if something is not as commercially viable in the white market, I should say, or it's not viewed as such maybe, then there's just, it has to be more like whale donations kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And it's a good point too with Bitcoin where it's at this point very, very much approved. I mean, we have a president who talks, I mean, Trump doesn't know anything about Bitcoin, but he praises Bitcoin, right? So I think times have really changed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So generally speaking, because Bitcoin does have that network effect, it's much easier for them to get development for sure. But yeah, you run into that cultural issue though, right? Where when you have, if you have a use case, for example, for privacy and for digital cash, Bitcoin has kind of lost a lot of respect because of its kind of trend towards that area, and some people are very suspicious of that. And I think that this has actually had a really big impact on Bitcoin adoption. For example, in darknet markets.
Yeah, although and this is not an area I know much about, but I would guess one of the biggest reasons is just that it sucks for like payments, right? I think that if you had a cheap enough Bitcoin on chain, that it would still be pretty high because the liquidity would be there and the ability to just use some basic coin join type stuff like Whirlpool would be good enough for most people that they would be like, I'm just going to stick with this. It's more that like when it's like $80 a transaction, they're like, Jesus Christ, we can't use this.
Well, actually, Bitcoin is still used on darknet markets, believe it or not. It seems crazy, but it is still used actually. If you look at the top drug markets, for example, according to Dread, 2 of them actually have Bitcoin still. The rest are all Monero only, but yeah. Plus, consider like ransomware. They usually prefer Monero, but they will accept Bitcoin because of the liquidity. And you also have issues with like jurisdictions not being able to like legally seize Bitcoin and stuff, depending on where it is. So that gets like kind of tricky as well. And also, I would point out that even stable coins are used a lot in black markets. This is very hard to measure, but you'll hear about these like markets in like China that sell like malware, or, whatever, and they're using like Tether basically, or USDC. So I mean, it doesn't necessarily like you are having transparent projects being openly used in these markets, mostly because people don't really care right now. But as time passes, you will see more and more of a shift to cryptocurrency that can easily use privacy. And the bellwether, in my opinion, is these drug markets, because they're kind of the where the flagship technology is kind of tested out. All right, if you know the history of Bitcoin, it's just where Bitcoin really, its usage really spiked up after.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's markets also that are easily observable, just through some Tor aggregate like Tor taxi or whatever. So
Yeah, it's always an interesting thing where the adoption of new technologies like this. I would say there's two big things at play, and it's usually a mix of these, but it's sometimes it's just one, which is one, what is this uniquely useful for? And you'll see tons of adoption there first, where it's like the purest, like you need this to do that. And like the Silk Road and Satoshi Dice were great examples of that, where you had like, Laszlo's pizzas and stuff like that, which like you could do that with like cash, no one cares. But you had no way of doing like cheap internet payments for cheap, pseudonymous at least internet payments for Satoshi Dice. And there was no uncensorable e-commerce kind of thing, digital cash, for Silk Road. And so it started there first. And on the other hand, you also see adoption flourish where you have it you explicitly market to a group. So, for example, if you exclude like El Salvador, for example, where it's like heavily focused on because of the Bukele regime has been sort of more open to these kinds of conversations and talks, et cetera. So therefore, you have El Salvador become, more of a hot spot, at least for a while, than, let's just say, Belize or some other country in the area. And so it's kind of the both of those types of things. I think that Bitcoin started in the darknet arena because there just wasn't a good option other than that. And it just sort of maintained presence and still does to a certain extent. This is my supposition, at least, because it's just been there the whole time and has a very high market cap and liquidity. And on the other hand, I definitely think that a lot in the Monero community have also promoted that very heavily. I hear it a lot. I've heard it for 9 years, I guess. 9 years of adoption. I've heard, darknet markets, this and that. In fact, the only time I ever got death threats was when I wrote a Cointelegraph article about Oasis getting rug pulled, and people freaked out about reporting that news. And so there's definitely I would say it's definitely a product market fit, right? But at the same time, it's also been marketed pretty heavily in that direction.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of my work has been based off of my theorizing about darknet markets. Yeah, I mean, the reason I think it's such a powerful, propaganda tool, if you want to call it that, is even people who don't know anything about cryptocurrency, if you just mention, oh, it's the cryptocurrency used in drug markets, they give you that expression, like, oh, really, kind of like when Tony Soprano walks into a restaurant and you're just like, oh, Tony's here, it has that respect because these are markets that we kind of understand that exist. And so it's, I understand that some people think that it's not the end all be all decider for what has the best privacy. Yeah, absolutely. But it's adoption. And it's also adoption by people who don't actually like cryptocurrency necessarily. A lot of these people, they're using cryptocurrency like it's gas for a car. It's a necessity for them. And they're waking up and they're like, oh crap, I need to buy that cryptocurrency again. That's actually very unique for these markets. Because if you think about like most cryptocurrency usage outside of that, it's just, recreational buying whatever, like a VPN, sending money to somebody else. That's all well and good. But this is a measurable market of people who are using cryptocurrency, and they're using cryptocurrency because they need it. And something like that could really be drawn if we go to the future where everything is digital. When we need cryptocurrency, we're going to want to use something that's battle tested in markets that are being looked at by all these 3-letter agencies. And so yeah, for that reason, it's actually a mark of pride for Monero people. It's we consider it proof that it works.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a certain something it definitely does prove, in which case it's has to work at least. Like, you can market the hell out of something all you want, and if it doesn't work, it won't work. But it has to have at least a minimum function, as far as I would say, like basic usability, convenience, privacy, and liquidity. And so it kind of represents, at least all of those together. Now, for example, you have something like Zcash, which or let's just say Pirate Chain, right? That uses a lot of the similar tech to Zcash, but does not have transparent options. If privacy were the only metric, then Pirate Chain would be the number one darknet currency. But there's so much else that goes into that, such as trust in the brand and the developers, such as liquidity, such as just, not being a meme coin kind of thing. No offense to the R people, but there's a lot of other things that go into that. One thing I think would be interesting to see is I kind of view like white and gray markets to a certain extent be what really powers a lot of darknet markets as well, as far as there has to be an ability to move to what you call real money, because even in people who extensively use darknet markets, that's still probably a minority of their purchases daily, that they need whatever they consider real money for their rent, their groceries, etc. And so if they can kind of go between those two, then it's useful. If they can't, then it's less useful.
Oh, 100%. And, what you're talking about is really this kind of flow of Monero that we see pretty much proven all the time. And like any merchant that posts data, Monero is always punching above its weight. Coin cards, Shop and Bit. You mentioned Nano GPT earlier. Monero is the most used cryptocurrency on Nano GPT. I mean, that's pretty incredible. It's not. It was made by guys who support Nano, and Monero is being used more. And that's exactly what it is. If you look at the Monero transactions, the daily transactions, you'll see a slow uptick after Monero was introduced on White House Market back in August 2019. And that slow uptick flowed into all these other markets as well. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It does have this kind of effect where people just have money lying around and they want to use it.
Yeah, that is definitely true. And the thing is, like, it's something that I find very fascinating personally is usage of crypto, of who uses what for what purpose. And especially because it's kind of like something, there's a lot of guessing game around that, because if this was all KYC stuff, you could tell, right? But it isn't, so you can't. And so, like, for example, Litecoin is overwhelmingly used in kind of those like regulated payment processors, like BitPay. It's like beats Bitcoin in what's it called, CoinGate, which is a European-based processor. It's one of the top 2 or 3. It's like above almost anything that's not Bitcoin or stablecoin. Bitrefill, it's pretty high usage in there, etc. And just in raw transaction numbers, it's like a couple 100,000, a day, which is kind of where Bitcoin was before the scaling problem started to hit. The thing that's been really sad to see, but at the same time, I'm kind of reasonable about why it's not always a failure, but it's still sad to see stablecoins pop up. And the craziest thing is stablecoins have reached a massive uptick in illicit usage too, like including darknet markets. And like, we're not talking some super cypherpunk whatever stablecoin. We're talking like freaking Tether, right? Tether and all its reversibility and stuff. And it's just like, I think that in that case, it's probably like a sacrifice irreversibility and privacy for just pure like liquidity.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And it's happening mostly in foreign markets. For example, China, I mentioned, the Mexican cartel, they were using it when they were laundering money as well. And yeah, it's liquidity, 100%. It's super easy to use. That's going to be changing definitely as more regulations come with these stable coins. That's been kind of the mission of the Trump administration, has just been everything with stable coins. That's the work that they've mostly been doing. So I would imagine that's going to change. But yeah, basically, they don't even really care that much about that the fact that everything is traceable, because most of what they're using is stuff that isn't even being like traced anyways, because they're in a different jurisdiction.
Yeah, it's funny how like a tool is a tool and people use it for whatever they want, and it's funny how it's like a more useful tool than a lot of what I would argue are better and more private cryptos, just because of the global liquidity. I know that it's really cropped up a lot in Russia, for example, during the whole period of sanctions, where people have been
Right.
sort of using that, and I guess Tether only cracks down on like the biggest ones, kind of thing.
I think there's also just a general ignorance about cryptocurrency for people. So they'd rather just hold dollars and also volatility. Those two things kind of go hand in hand. And so they'd rather just hold a stable coin.
Yeah, for sure. So I would kind of, I mean, as far as like culture and how that affects the usage of crypto, which cryptos have what culture, etc. My kind of thought process. Again, there's so many thought processes because of of everything. But I kind of like the idea of like gray market supremacy. The kind of like the Craigslist is the market that we're aiming for, sort of, because it's sort of the nexus of radical freedom with the world, as far as this is, the most freedom we can get is in something that's used in a non-censorable way, and like you could censor white market stuff pretty well. It's hard to censor gray market, just like in terms of like black market, but it's also like it's kind of like black market at massive scale that dips into essentials. Which I haven't used any darknet markets. Do any tend to sell like completely legal type things? So like, for
Yeah.
example, any darknets
I
sell
think,
like groceries,
oh,
like those kinds of things? Yeah.
I don't know if that would be classified as a darknet market. I know that like there are like marketplaces where you can buy like XMR Bazaar, for example. But yeah, I guess the definition of darknet market would imply that there's some illicit goods. So I'm not really sure about that one. But I like your point though about like gray markets and stuff, and how that's kind of I totally agree. Like at the end of the day, you just want usage, usage. I think this is really, really important. And usage flows from a lot of different things. Really, all else equal, if one person's using cryptocurrency, it's more likely that another person will use cryptocurrency. So you just want to get more people using it. And this is something I see a lot pushed in Monero. We had that campaign for a while, use Monero. And this is some people really hate that. I love it because it emphasizes what we believe in, which is using a cryptocurrency.
Yeah, for sure. This is something that I've sort of noticed, and if I would consider like Monero's expansion from, maybe more fringe to something that everyone in crypto at least knows about and is, familiar and respects to a certain degree at least, would be kind of the easy mobile wallet integration. Kind of, I think Edge was one of the first to do that in a kind of more broadly accessible way, but then also just generic inroads into gray markets, rather than purely black markets. Like when you started to see people in like the libertarian movement who weren't just playing around with it on the side. They were like, I'm going to sell my pastries here in Monero. I'm going to sell my this. And then you see places like PorkFest, Anarchapulco, places like that have like a lot of like real digital cash kind of use cases for that. It's kind of where it sort of catapulted into something, better. I don't know if you notice the same thing, or would you agree with that?
Well, I think you're underrating how much Monero is used on markets, like peer-to-peer markets is kind of how I'm thinking of it. XMR Bazaar is doing very, very well. And as I mentioned before, coin cards and ShopInBit, I mean, we're being used more than Monero. I mean, than Bitcoin on there. Monero is being used more than Bitcoin on ShopInBit, which is kind of insane, and sites like that. I would say Monero adoption has actually been fantastic. And I do agree though that with gray markets, it's important to just to have adoption. This is just a key thing, and using a cryptocurrency is so important because the main use case that most people have is buying and holding a cryptocurrency like a tech stock, and this is a very toxic thing culturally, in my opinion, because it erodes the soul of cryptocurrency, which should be digital cash.
Yeah, I would have no disagreement with that. That's kind of, in fact, that's kind of been what I've been on about for many years. The thing is, recently, like, I'm sort of a free market maximalist, right? And whenever I see the market valuing things that I don't necessarily think that I'm wrong, but I have to reevaluate my positions and see if there's something that I missed, like a nugget that I missed. And I've always been like, you know, since before crypto, I was trying to look at like a gold-backed debit card so I could just live off of gold. I mean, I didn't want fiat. And then, you know, I never bought crypto. I've only ever earned it for goods and services. And, you know, closed my bank account 2016 and just I've been laser focused on this because I'm like, oh, this is what's really valuable. And then the market tells me that it values something different. And kind of how what I've sort of figured out on the number go up thing. Yes, greed and, you know, pure greed is something that's very powerful. And yes, of course, you'll have that sort of rise. Also, I've kind of found that for most of what people want to do, their use case has been their earnings use cases have been censored more than their transaction use cases. Where if you pull the average human in, let's just say, you know, the first world, right? Let's just say the developed world of like U.S., Canada, Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, Japan, and the average person, like of all the things that they would want to buy, how much of that can they do with their bank card? I would say it's statistically probably like 99%, like almost everything. And then, of course, you have the fringes where they can't do that. And, of course, then you have looming censorship and social credit score and all the other awful stuff, which will very much change that equation, right? But for right now, it seems like where people are being censored is from earning, where you need to be a credit investor in the U.S., for example, to be able to make certain investments. And there's just this big, like, Nancy Pelosi Ponzi of like how do you actually earn on your money? And if you're small potatoes, you just have a little bit in your savings account, you get wrecked by inflation anyway. And so it seems like crypto uncensored the earnings part first, as far as that's what people cared about first. And for me, it was hard to split between greed, like criticizing Moon Boy greed type stuff, and that where this has been this is a much more commonly censored thing than ability to buy things. So also I've noticed that like in the Monero community, there's been a lot more interest since a lot of Bitcoin maximalists have started to come over, and there's been a lot more Moon Boy posts in the Monero community. I would say necessarily Moon Boy posts, but posts that talk about, you know, save in Monero, you're going to do better than if you save in fiat kind of stuff. So I don't know. What do you think of all that stuff?
Well, first off, you mentioned that there's kind of like a flight towards, you know, like precious metals, for example, or like things where like using the dollar is just like you have to use it because it's just the inflation is ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And I totally agree with what you're saying when most people, that's how they view fiat. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to convince somebody to use a cryptocurrency when they get basically everything they want already with Venmo. Mm-hmm. And this is the problem here. And so it's actually one of the other reasons why I kind of mentioned this in Darknet Market Maximalism, because if they had their way, they would buy drugs with Venmo. They don't really care about cryptocurrency, but they have to go through that process because they have no other choice, right? So I think in the future, we will have more and more things like that where, you know, social credit score, it's inevitable, digital ID, inevitable. Like we're slowly getting towards that point. And when that does happen, yeah, we're going to need cryptocurrency. We're going to need digital cash, right? Mm-hmm. Now, regarding the Moon Boys in Monero, oh yeah, they exist. I'm friends with a lot of them. They used to exist.
They kind of were recent last couple of years.
Well, I mean, you have seen like a price uptick, mm-hmm. you know. Yeah, I mean, they're there, and I'm friends with them. Like, it's all good. it's one of those things where it's a fine line, and I just like to represent kind of the other side that pushes against it. I don't hold any Monero, but if I did, maybe I'd be very happy, right?
Yeah,
And so
of
that's
course.
kind of the thing. Like I view the buying and holding as an investment strategy as completely rational,
Hmm.
probably a great idea depending on what you're looking at, right? And different people do that. Where it gets out of hand, though, is when people are just caring about the price.
Hmm.
And then they're entering the Monero ecosystem and not caring at all about the privacy. And you do have people like that in Monero. And it's kind
Mm.
of, I don't like to gatekeep. I like to show by example, and just kind of, that's why I have all these informative videos that I make. And I kind of just really push, like, use Monero, use non KYC, etc. But it's impossible to enforce something like this. You're going to have people who don't really care as much about the hardcore stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Have you found there's any pure Moon Boys, or are they always like part Moon Boy, part Cypherpunk?
I would say there's definitely pure Moon Boys for sure. Yeah, I don't know.
Hmm.
It's they're definitely more of the anti-government persuasion, though. I think this is one of the key differences, though. They got that
Hmm.
kind of rebellion part of them.
Hmm.
And this is different than other cryptocurrencies like Dogecoin. People are buying Dogecoin to stick it to the man. But with Monero, yeah, you kind of are, right?
Yeah, for sure. It definitely does has that vibe to it, and it is kind of interesting how the number go up thing. I think is a lot of it is not explicit at first. Like I've noticed this with people. Like a lot of times, people, for the most part in crypto, I would even say most of crypto as a whole, are speculative investors, even the people that care about good things. And like for example, people that care about privacy and uncensorable money and stuff like that often buy into those digistocks, as it were,
Mm-hmm.
and they're like, "Oh, I really value this. This is cool. I'm going to put money into it and hope my money goes up because I'm correct." And it's like, well, it's kind of funny. There's a payment company called Flexa, which powers a bunch of crypto payments, including Zcash, for example. And there's an AMP token behind that. And a lot of the token people are just turning into whiny moon boys, right? Kind of a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, you invested in basically a token that gets paid back from transaction fees of this protocol. Like you should understand this should take a long time. You should be in it for the revenue from the token, not necessarily the token itself being able to go up in price so you could flip it, you know? And yet you have a bunch of people say, "Oh, the AMP price sucks. When are you going to do something about it?" And I'm like, these guys invested into the vision of crypto commerce in the real world, and they still just want the money at some point. And I kind of feel like that happens a lot in crypto. You have a lot of people that buy into an idea, and then they want the buy-in to do well rather than the idea. It kind of gets corrupted over time.
Oh, 100%. Like, this is, in my opinion, the biggest challenge facing cryptocurrency from a cultural perspective, is that moonboyism is just kind of how human beings are. Because human beings, like, we have greed as one of our sins, right? And that's just kind of what humans do. It's pretty understandable, because not everybody getting into cryptocurrency is going to have like the peer-to-peer mindset, right, or the open
Hmm.
source philosophy. The soccer mom down the street, she's never heard the phrase open source in her entire life. She doesn't care about that. No, she wants to make money, so she buys, Bitcoin or whatever, and she
Yeah.
holds it. She doesn't actually buy Bitcoin. She holds it on one of those applications like freaking PayPal or something, and she's like, hey Xenu, I have Bitcoin, that Bitcoin stuff you've been telling me about. And I have to kind of like smile and nod. You know what I'm talking about? This is
Hmm.
kind of just how most people are. It's kind of just how it is. Yeah.
Yeah, it is really funny to me because a lot of times when I've talked about crypto, I've like sold them on it, sort of. As in, I've told them about what it is, why it matters, what it's useful for. Here, look, check out this demo of this wallet, see what you can buy with it there, all that kind of stuff. And then they're like really into it. And then like, man, later I get a message and they're just like, man, that was great. Like, you really had me sold. I bought a bag of Dash or something. I'm just like, like you just bought it, or are you gonna, like, oh my gosh, I got some Zcash too. I got some Monero, and it's, I want. How do I hold it? I'm just like, I'm waiting for that follow up of like, how do I spend it, and then it just never comes. Like, it's just, they love the idea of this. They bought into it for the exact same reasons, or they bought into the exact same pitch that I bought into, but then it just goes right to the, I want to buy it and see what happens. This is how I subscribe. This is how I sign up to join the Cool Kids Club.
Yeah, I'm always careful when I talk about cryptocurrency with my friends, just because that's just what happens, right? And I hate if people like lose money because of it, because pretty often they're buying the top. It's just, once you start getting the text messages from your friends, you're like, oh boy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, I mean, yeah, that's just how people are. So usually if I'm asked, I'll like bring up the very nerdy parts of cryptocurrency. Like, I've been fixing my cryptocurrency miner. I got to do a few things with that. I make it very dry and scare them off, I guess.
Yeah. You know what's kind of funny? There's an interesting kind of like, we're talking about culture, right? And I think culture is kind of more language. It's a social language of some kind. It's just sort of which people respond to which language. And having been in the peripherals of, like, again, the Zcash community, which is a great example of like the polar opposite. First of all, a lot of people really understand and get into sending shielded memos to each other. And they think it's really cool that you have fully encrypted, no one can decrypt it. You could just send someone a message over this thing, kind of like Signal, but like in a more decentralized way. They get really into that. And at Boston Blockchain Week, I ran into some Zcash people who were kind of in the, let's just say, the trans sex work part of world, right? And a lot of the exact same pitch as far as like radical freedom, and this the same thing that someone would say when they're pointing out darknet usage with the Monero community, where like, this is why I really care about Zcash, and I really think this, I really want to be super private because my life depends on it sometimes. Like, people, I've had death threats, I've had all this kind of stuff. What I do is not, is censored a lot, and I don't have good ways of like earning money in an uncensorable way. So this really works for me, and also become some of the most passionate onboarders that taking pictures. I'm on board of this random person to Zcash, here's his Ashley wallet, all this kind of stuff. It's kind of just funny how like, it's just like the edgelord drug dealer and the trans sex worker are like the complete like the archetypes that almost like the archetypes that the opposite side uses to malign the other. About, look, you're just a bunch of kind of edgelordy, Jew hating drug people or whatever on this side. Oh, you're a bunch of like trans loving whatever people on this side. And it's kind of, to me, it's sort of funny when you see that. And I have seen a lot of people like criticize both sides this last week on X, right? From both sides of the thing. Yeah. And it's sort of like horseshoe theory, right? It's like the opposite ends of the spectrum kind of come almost to touch at the other side of it, where they're not actually that far away. It's still like people who are not accepted into polite society, who need radical freedom and privacy,
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing is just a reflection of society, I think. And so there are neo-Nazis, there are trans sex workers, there are all these different types of people. And what you're going to find is, over time, more and more people will need peer-to-peer cash. And I think that is something that pretty much anybody who is passionate about this sort of thing can agree on.
Yeah. And that's kind of where, like, I think in the early days of like I kind of feel like Monero has always sort of been much more street, whereas the early days of Zcash started very much as like a top-down style idea where there was some very smart people like Zuko and plenty others who came up with this idea, had good connections, got it funded, and then built some really incredible tech. And then Zcash has sort of started to filter down into its own like grassroots community now, whereas Monero's always kind of been there. And I kind of find that you're sort of seeing like the average Zcash user versus average Monero user are very similar people who probably just have different cultures, right? They're the same, like, you know, every man sort of in terms of like not a lot of money, not a little money, just like every man that cares about decentralization and censorship resistance and privacy above all. And it's just that one of them has a very much more like, they're much more likely to see the trans sex worker as their friend, whereas the other one is much more likely to see the anti-Semitic drug dealer as their friend, for example. But other than that, it's literally like people in the same coffee shop, but one votes red, one votes blue kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm not really sure if I completely agree there. Twitter is not really the best way of measuring something like this. A good measuring stick would be something like Monerotopia. I mean, if you go to Monerotopia, I think you've been there, right? Yeah, it's.
I have not yet been there. I was going. Okay. I was thinking of going. Never ended up going this time. The Wow Narrow dude had a presentation about me, I hear, so I was there in spirit. I hear it is in February, right, of this year.
Yeah, I'm probably going to end up going.
Yeah, anyways, never say never. I might go.
We'll see. Anyways, the point I'm trying to make though is like the people who actively support Monero, it's not like it's not like neo-Nazis, right? Again, I think that
not a lot of them at least. I know a couple.
Well, there's a couple on Twitter, yeah, and it's kind of just like they exist, and that's kind of just the way it is, I think you're spot on though with the fact that there's a separation of this kind of like in it for the tech versus the more rebellious kind of side, and that I think really defines the contrast between Zcash and Monero most of all. But you do have definitely more of the rebellious side on the Monero side. But here's what I would say though is that if Zcash was used more, they would absolutely have neo-Nazis supporting them. And the thing is, like, we're not seeing Zcash used as much, and that's just kind of how it is. But I guarantee that they would also have neo-Nazi, people using it. So,
yeah, I mean that's I would say true. As a percentage of, I guess, mind share or voice, right? At least public voice, right? Again, we do have to separate X from other places. I definitely would say. Because of the language and the, all that kind of stuff, you probably have a bigger representation in the Monero community, just like you have a larger trans sex worker kind of contingent in the Zcash community. But definitely it's true that like when you hit like more of a mass adoption type thing, you either get all types or you have to explicitly chase some people out and exclude them. And I think that it's really not a good culture. I don't think it works out having a free, permissionless, open source type of culture and actually, as a culture, exclude people,
Well, I think a lot of things would change if Monero would just pump like crazy. I don't think it would really I think we saw something actually very similar happen with Bitcoin. Now, it wasn't maybe to the extent that it's at. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to remember. It was so long ago, where Bitcoin is so watered down now, right? But it used to be a lot more edgy, right? I think that, I think that something very similar would happen with Monero, where if it were to have very high upward price movement, you would see a lot more normies liking it.
Yeah, definitely. There's a certain element to that as well. It is going to be interesting to see as things sort of start to grow, kind of how things shake out. And the one thing I think is kind of funny is like the average crypto person, rather than, which is still a subset of humanity, right? It's still a very small group, but they're starting to warm up a little bit to Zcash because of some of the marketing that's happening lately, like some of the influencer type stuff, but also some of the, oh, look, buying burrito at Chipotle, which some people are harsh on poor old Zooks about that stuff. But like people who go to Chipotle are like, oh, it makes sense to me. It's real money then. And then you also have like a lot of people who use like dexes and stuff like Radium or whatever on Solana. And they're like, oh, you can go from Radium to swap Solana to Zcash. They're like, oh, okay. My buddy got me into meme coins. I do a little bit of meme coin stuff, but I heard about this one. And then you kind of go into that thing. So it will be very interesting to see, like, that's I guess, probably one of the cultural risks, right? Is not allowing new people in. And sometimes it's more of like a technical and a partnership thing rather than a cultural reason for that, right? So like if everyone gets into crypto by buying on a centralized exchange, then everyone will not get into whatever crypto is not on that exchange because that's just kind of where they are, you know? It'll be a different kind of people that goes through like the runs BISC and does some kind of thing like that.
Yeah, I mean, with regards to Zcash usage, it's actually been extremely low. If you look at the daily transaction usage, up until this price bump, because yes, after the price bump, it's skyrocketed. Before that, it was at like the lowest it had ever been. In fact, there was only like 2,200 transactions happening every day. And of those, half of them were block rewards. So, I mean, it was really, really low adoption.
Yeah.
Now, I hope that they have more shielded transactions being used. It seems like that is happening. And it seems like they have like, more integration stuff. Whether that's going to like, be, be used in the future as much as it is now. I personally, I doubt it just because I think it's just being used a lot now because it just pumped like a stupid amount, right? It went up like 300% or whatever. I mean, that's so much. So anyways, I think that would probably be more of the reason why there's been a spike in transactions. And again, I don't really agree with how I think Monero is relatively open to all different types of people. And there's a ton of people active in the Monero community who openly just buy on centralized exchanges. And they get criticized, but I don't think they really care.
So other than Kraken, where is that now? I know it was on Trade Ogre back when that was a thing, and then obviously like Binance before all that stuff. But is it mostly Kraken, or are there other ones that you know of?
It's mostly Kraken. I think MEXC, that one. I think they have it.
Yeah, it's kind of a.
Is that even a KYC?
I don't know if it is, but it's sort of like the new Binance in terms of it's a new very large exchange that kind of like everyone is on kind of thing.
Well, yeah, I actually kind of have a little pet theory, conspiracy about that, where I think they're purposely making people go through Kraken in the United States to kind of make it easier to kind of keep tabs on who's using Monero.
It's almost like honeypot type stuff.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I would imagine pretty much every centralized exchange is a honeypot anyway. But yeah, it would probably make investigations easier. But yeah, it's not really available in that many places right now. Yeah, you're right about that.
Yeah, for sure. That is kind of so. From what like my perspective, as far as like someone who, there's two things that I would if I said like what are my like skills, what am I good at in crypto, I probably would not say communication, podcasting, KOL stuff, any of that stuff. I probably wouldn't include that. I would say the thing is like number one is like using as currency, because I've sort of forced myself to do that over the last decade. But the other thing is like partnerships and like biz dev, like the kind of stuff that if I can't do a thing that I want to with pick a crypto, I try to find those relationships that then if I make it work, then now I can do the thing. So from that perspective, I've sort of been watching, like I kind of had a lot of disappointment with the way, in particular, like Zcash was sort of run in the past, because I was just like, look, I did a 12-month podcast series called the Zcash Podcast on this channel, and first off, I ran out of people to interview at one point because there just weren't a lot of talkative people in the ecosystem. But also, all the ZEC that I earned, I had difficulty doing anything with, as far as like, what am I going to spend it on? What am I going to use it for? And a lot of that I like offered to help. Like, look, I have these relationships already with some of these things, and there just wasn't tons of interest. Since Josh took over the Electric Coin Company, the attitude has been very different, and I know that a lot of these connections are super valuable. As far as, for example, I think everyone's sleeping on how big the Near Intense DEX has been, as far as now integrated into the Zashi wallet, where you can just sort of one-click ZEC to any other asset, and within a couple minutes it'll arrive there on decentralized rails, is kind of a huge thing, because now even if you can't pay directly with ZEC anywhere, you can still sort of pay with it everywhere. And just that bridge without a centralized provider, it's like the decentralized Trocador sort of vibe. And so that's huge. And obviously being integrated into Flexa is huge, because you could pay for like gas station, your burrito, your whatever else, at least in the US for now. And there's a few of these kinds of things that I think really bridge it over. And not to mention, you get on Gemini, Coinbase, all these other places, you could just get some ZEC, and it's like right in there. And so that's something that I think I don't know. Again, you mentioned how Twitter's not the real world, and it's sort of not true, but it's very true at the same time. Where like I've been chatting with like Doug offline, or in DMs or whatever, about trying to figure out how to get Monero onto like some more regulated exchanges, because he views that as very necessary for like the normies to get involved. And then some people say, screw you, don't do that, blah, blah, blah. But like there's both sides of things. And I definitely think that like the normie bridge is something that every crypto kind of needs at this point.
Yeah, I mean, if you want more people to buy Monero, you want it on more centralized exchanges. It's true. It's kind of just the nature of how things work. And there is also an argument for moonboyism that I have been open about saying this, but part of the reason why the Cubic attack was successful is because Monero's price isn't as high as it could be. Because if the Monero price was higher, miners would get more for mining Monero anyways. So the attack would not have had as much power necessarily. So I would say that, yeah, it's from a privacy standpoint, centralized exchanges are awful. It's pretty much the worst thing you can do. And so my solution to this is, if somebody asks me for help about acquiring Monero, I just make it very clear about risks that can happen from using a centralized exchange. And because usually they don't really want to use another means of acquiring Monero or whatever. But it's just the way it is. And yeah, I do wish Monero did have more options. I would say Sarai is probably going to be a big deal for us once that comes around. But that's cool news about Zcash though. With I know their wallet has a lot of people like that, and being able to automatically swap it is really convenient. There's actually an interesting irony here, though, is that if we see Zcash adopted more in darknet markets, do you think that service would be as readily available? Because I believe the regulatory pressure would actually start to impact Zcash if that sort of thing were to start seeing adoption. So I'm not really sure how the Zcash community will react to that. But if they want to have an asset that grows in value, that's gonna have a big impact, because Monero, we've basically been delisted pretty much everywhere, and we're still kind of trucking along in price, mostly because culturally we don't really care that much. But I have a feeling that Zcash and a lot of the VC investors, I think they would care. And this is part of the reason why we're concerned about the Zcash privacy model, because if they're indebted to their investors and all that, would they change their tune if something like that were to happen?
Yeah, that would be interesting. And I do know that I try to not be too much into the normie space. I like to be in like the normie bridge space, but that's been kind of an objection with Bitcoin since day one, where oh, it's darknet money, oh, it's criminals, and people people don't say it that much today. They still do a little bit, and that has been used by every politician in the book. Every politician is an excuse to crack down on people. Again, I'm you have the dubious honor of joining at least 4 people on this podcast have either are currently in or have been to prison for crypto stuff. And so there's kind of there's definitely that side of things. I think crypto as a whole can't be categorized like that anymore. It's too mainstream. The president of the strongest nation in the world is like aping into meme coins right and left. I mean, you can't get more mainstream than that at that point.
It's crazy to think that Melania coin happened. Like that actually wasn't a joke.
Mm-hmm. I mean, what if it was at the same time as it wasn't, right? It's all kind of a joke. But the point is, like, things are so big now. I don't think you can put crypto as a whole into the darknet market. Kind of like, look, that's the drug money. But if something like Zcash had that, I think that first of all, for it to make an impact, I think it would have to be a significant percentage of usage, not just 5% or something. It would have to be like big. And I think if you onboard non-darknet people faster, then that becomes less of a liability. That being said, at some point that is just going to be a thing where some people might be like, oh, you know what, the shielded stuff, it's only the criminals that use that. You should just... And at some point, here's the thing. I'm very optimistic about the future of crypto, but I'm very realistic that there's never going to be a situation where the government is 100% our friend. That's just not the point of government, right? They're just always the enemy of freedom. It just is what it is. So there will be a point where there will be censored Zcash things, right? As far as all of crypto, there will be things that get blocked. And what I wonder, I guess we'll have to see what it looks like at that point. I think it'll just be that the DEX style integrations like Near Intense, Maya Protocol, Thorchain, Chainflip, hopefully Sarai comes online at some point. Like that becomes the infra that you really rely on, right? And like, for example, I've been close to the Maya Protocol community especially, but sort of close to the Thorchain community. I know the founder, JP. I know Chad, the kind of lead dev for a while. I know Familiar Cow, the current kind of lead guy who's been doing a lot of pushing for Monero stuff as well today, or these days, I think. I actually told him at in Vegas, I told Thorchain and the Maya people, both of them, that they should probably look into Monero because there will be a lot of demand from that side.
Yeah.
But so I wonder if that put the thought in their mind, but I'm honestly probably not. It's there's just so much outside demand. But I think that that's going to be the important part, where at some point you will have, first of all, everything is going to become on chain at some point. And I think that the sexes are going to turn into like Base, where it's like technically crypto and it's faster and more permissionless and less friction than a sex, but it's still kind of a company, you know? I think it's going to go that way. But yes, there will at some point be some sort of if you haven't jumped through these certain hoops, then you won't be able to use the specific parts. And this is where, if ever you want to have, I don't know, a debate with someone on this stuff, I would try to talk to Amin Solmani, one of the Tornado Cash guys, who also, I forget what a protocol or company, it's called Oxbow, I think, today. But he's like an OG privacy enthusiast, cypherpunk, whatever, who is, I wouldn't say he's flipped, but he's become very much into this idea of using zero knowledge privacy that you can also guarantee that no illicit funds were mixed in with yours. And for me, I don't know. I don't like that. But he makes some good points, I think. I don't know. That might be an interesting discussion, I guess is all I'm saying. But I think that will be something in the future where you will have shielded pools that will automatically spit money out if they detect it's been involved with something. So like once it's in the pool, it's already, you can do whatever you want. No one can tell. I think that'll be a thing in the future. I'm not really excited about this. Let's be very clear. But I think that will happen in the future.
Yeah, I mean, something like that sounds awful to me. And
Hmm.
this is really one of the biggest concerns that we have with Zcash.
Hmm.
Because, like, you were saying about like when it would start to be censored, it sounds like something like a ransomware attack. That's probably where it would be because those are high profile cases. And if they have all of this, liquidity that they have access to, that's definitely going to be looked at by the feds, right? So I
Yeah.
would say that, and with Monero too, yeah, we aren't on enough decentralized exchanges.
Hmm.
Obviously, there's a lot of work being done, and part of the reason though is most of the way that people are getting Monero is just using like coin swap websites and like wallets with built-in like infrastructure. I don't think those are going to last much longer. I think those are going to eventually be taken down through regulatory reasons, just because, well, you can just access whatever you want there, and the three-letter agencies don't have any way of seeing what goes in or out. Well, that's not true. They do have ways they can subpoena them, but you know what I mean. It's just it's on the clear net. It's easily accessible. Definitely not going to last much longer.
Yeah.
So
I would say most. I would say yes to that, with the asterisk of a lot of these swap services, they all use centralized rails, and
mm,
a lot of them are also starting to introduce like a DEX option. So for example, if you go to, app.thorswap.finance versus, changely.com, it's basically the same thing, but Changely is fully centralized and Thorswap runs on fully decentralized rails. And so I think that a lot of these, at least AMM decks type ones, like maybe not the atomic, like the old school atomic style. I'm not super, I mean, I know a decent amount about dexes, but from people who are much more in the weeds than me, they kind of say that there's four generations of decks, sort of. That there's like the early atomic decks is like Gen 1. I forget what Gen 2 was, but like the AMM decks is like a Thorchain with liquidity pools, like a Uniswap is like Gen 3, I think, and then the Gen 4 is the intense based ones, like near intense, which basically just sort of arranges liquidity back end and just it's sort of like the combination of both, sort of, where you have like a bunch of liquidity out there, but also is just like does an atomic swap at the end of the day and is just so much more smooth. But I guess my point is, from the AMM DEX version onward, is able to be a substitute for a centralized exchange, where now you can plug that in. So a lot of these sites might stay around. Maybe not like the sketchy ones, but a lot of them might stay around and just be a website that plugs into a DEX in the back end.
yeah, probably something like that would make a lot of sense. Yeah, it's there's been a ton of work lately with those DEXs. It's cool to see.
Yeah. So I guess one more kind of broader question on this whole like culture thing. I kind of like, I'm sort of the point of view, as I mentioned, that the various privacy camps, and again, we sort of talked about like the cartoonish extremes, right? But I kind of view like it's all sort of the same team with some very real disagreements, but kind of all in the same basic mission. So I guess what I would ask you is, at what point, what is minimum viable culture, I guess, or minimum viable cypherpunk, whatever you want to call it, for the Zcash community? Like where do they have to go before you're like, well, it's not all the way, it's not where I'd like it to be, but at least this is like you're in the club, you're cool enough. Like what would you want to see?
We'll keep it real simple. Darknet adoption.
Interesting. And now by
Well,
that,
and the reason
yes.
for that is it's a simple, hey, you're part of the club now.
Hmm.
Welcome. Now you're going to start dealing with the heat, and we'll see how they react. Because based on what we've kind of alluded to at the end here, when we're talking about different
Hmm.
shielded pools and stuff, I have a suspicion that this is the direction that Zcash is going to trend in. Because I think that they have too much corporate interest to do otherwise. I'd like to be wrong, but that will be the test for Zcash if it does happen. Until then, I mean, they had a great price bump. It seems like they have some cool stuff happening. I mean, that's great and all. And yeah, it's just not really. There's a lot of other things. I don't really want to go down a whole laundry list of things I don't
Of
like about
course.
Zcash. I
But
think
that would be the
what,
big one that sort of signals that there's something good.
yeah, I firmly believe that. Yes.
Now, on that subject, what by dark date adoption is there like a minimum like total threshold, or is it a percentage thing? As in, would you be like, oh well, darknet markets have like at least a few of the major ones have Zcash as an option, but most of what people use Zcash for overwhelmingly is not that. Or would you want to see it be like a at least 10% of usage or stuff tends to be around that?
Well, to be fair, it's not like darknet statistics are like posted like on the internet, but we have like a pretty good idea of usage based on like the talk going on Dread, for example, which is like the darknet version of Reddit. They have a subdread for Monero, which has I think 90,000 users, which is pretty massive if you think about it. And I mean, they don't even have one for Zcash. It's kind of just like it's just not being used right now. We'd start to see markets starting to accept it as an option. In the past, I have seen markets include, support for like Litecoin and Zcash once or twice, and stable coins even. It has happened, but it's just not being used. And we just know that because vendors aren't, using it or accepting it. So it may seem like a ridiculous thing to wait for, but I think that's kind of the test is darknet market adoption. That's what separates the boys from the men.
Yeah, and what would you start to view? What would you view as the opposite for Monero? Just, I mean, losing darknet markets is obviously one thing, but is there anything else that you'd see? Like, for example, what if like Gemini started supporting Monero in New York, for example, which would mean someone went in there and got the bit license for them and stuff.
Yeah.
Like, would that be a bad sign for you? Or is there an equivalent or something where you'd be like, oh, or like say there's a U.S. state passes a Monero strategic reserve law or something, or there's an ETF. Like, what are these kinds of like bad signs for like a direction for Monero from your perspective?
Yeah, it would be like a Michael Saylor-esque figure becoming way too powerful, which we basically have seen with Bitcoin. And kind of this move towards treating Monero just as a tech stock essentially, with the usage of it kind of going down the gutter. I still support Bitcoin. It's not like I don't support Bitcoin. I'm just highly critical of it for those sorts of things. They've really switched from being digital cash to, just being some investment vehicle.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, we're coming up on the 2 hour mark. Probably should leave after I mentioned that this podcast was sort of Vlad's sloppy seconds. We should sort of leave him some sloppy seconds for whenever you go on his show, right? So, what a twist, what a reversal. So is there anything you'd want to shill? Because I did check my clock, and it is, in fact, shill o'clock. So what should I shill on the way out?
Yeah, antimoonboy.com is my website. I have a podcast every Monday, Anti-Moonboy News, YouTube, Odyssey, and Rumble channel with tons of content, like my podcast, as well as the series Attack of the Poison Outputs about attacking Monero privacy. And Darknet Market Maximalism is a really good read. It's about an hour-long podcast you can just listen to. So throw it on, go for a walk. It's a good time.
Yeah, I'm like 37 minutes into the hour, so I got through
nice.
a good chunk of it. I'll be sure to finish the rest at some point. But yeah, well, good, cool being on. Thanks very much for this. We'll have everyone follow you, Xenu Monero on X, which is, as we all know, where the real discourse happens. So definitely go there. And yeah.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you for letting me on your show. And
Yeah,
I thought this was a fantastic talk, and I think it's going to prove the haters wrong, because I saw some people saying don't waste your time here, but I'm like, no, I think we're going to have some good discussion, and I think we covered a lot of really important things.
Yes. Well, I have to say, proving haters wrong is literally why I wake up in the morning. So
yeah,
that makes sense.
Hell yeah.
Now it's on Vlad to top this. So he might want to top it by making you be on for 8 hours straight. but hopefully not.
Yeah, I hope not. That's why I messaged him. I'm like, listen, we're not doing like 8 hours here, but I think we could get some good content out of it. So,
Absolutely. Well, yeah. Well, thanks for being on, everyone. Thanks for watching. This has been great. Sorry for the extreme cutting out after 20 minutes, but I will upload it on the whole thing on X. Hopefully the streaming gods will be in my favor in the future. But thanks everyone for watching. Have a fantastic weekend. Don't forget, taxation is theft, and your phone is spying on you. Fiat is a scam. So use crypto before it's too late. See you all. Bye bye.